When you're on the receiving end of the silent treatment, it can feel like the loudest noise in the world. Someone you care about, someone you expect honesty and communication from, suddenly decides to shut down and lock you out. No words, no explanation, just silence. And in that silence, your mind starts working overtime. You start asking yourself, what did I do wrong? Why won't they just talk to me? Why am I being treated like this? It's confusing, it's frustrating, and most of all, it's painful. But here's the thing you have to understand. The silent treatment is not just being quiet. There's a difference between taking time to cool off and intentionally withholding communication. One is healthy, the other is toxic. Silence can be powerful when it's about pausing to process emotions, but when it becomes a tool to punish or control, that silence isn't neutral anymore. It's weaponized. And that's the first step to dealing with it, recognizing it for what it actually is. If you don't name it, you'll misinterpret it. You'll start believing it's your fault, or you'll start bending over backwards to win back the attention of someone who is deliberately choosing not to engage. When you know what you're looking at, you don't get pulled into the trap. Think about it like this. Imagine you're playing a game and the other person decides they're going to stop playing, but they still expect you to stay on the field, running around confused, trying to figure out the rules. That's what the silent treatment does. It changes the rules without telling you, and it keeps you in a place of uncertainty. But once you call it out in your own mind, once you realize this isn't a healthy pause, this isn't space, this is withdrawal, you stop letting it control you. And here's what's really important. The silent treatment says more about them than it does about you. It reveals their inability to handle conflict in a constructive way. It's not a reflection of your worth or how much you deserve to be heard. It's a reflection of their avoidance, their discomfort with vulnerability, or their attempt to gain control. Once you see it through that lens, you stop personalizing it. You stop saying, I must be unworthy of a response, and you start saying, this person doesn't have the tools or the willingness to communicate right now. That shift in perspective is everything. Because when you don't recognize the silent treatment for what it is, you get pulled into a cycle of self-doubt. You start rehearsing conversations in your head. You start apologizing for things you didn't even do. You start shrinking just to try and get them to speak. But when you see it clearly, you realize you don't have to play that game. You realize silence isn't power. Silence, when it's used as punishment, is actually weakness disguised as strength. Now, does that mean you respond with anger? No. Does that mean you ignore them back, tit for tat? No. Recognition is not about retaliation. It's about clarity. It's about saying to yourself, okay, this isn't communication. This is manipulation. And I'm not going to get pulled into it. That inner clarity is what protects you from spiraling into anxiety and insecurity. The silent treatment thrives on confusion. It thrives on you second-guessing yourself. It thrives on your fear of losing connection. The moment you shine a light on it, the moment you call it by its name, it starts losing its power. You no longer see it as some mysterious punishment you have to endure. You see it as a choice the other person is making, and that gives you space to make a choice of your own. Because here's the truth, you cannot control when someone chooses silence over dialogue, but you can control how you interpret it. You can control whether you internalize it or detach from it. And that control, that recognition, is what keeps your peace intact. So the next time you're faced with the silent treatment, instead of spiraling into what's wrong with me, ask yourself, what's really happening here? Is this about me, or is this about their way of avoiding real communication? That one shift, naming the behavior, takes you from powerless to powerful. Because when you can recognize silence for what it truly is, you stop being a prisoner to it. And sometimes the most powerful response to silence is refusing to let it define you. When someone gives you the silent treatment, one of the hardest things to resist is that urge to chase. You feel the pull immediately, the desire to break through the wall, to get some sort of reaction, to prove that you care enough to close the gap. And if you're wired to value connection, that urge feels almost impossible to ignore. You start sending texts, asking questions, circling around them, trying to break the silence with words, because the quiet feels unbearable. But here's the problem: when you chase, you hand over your power. You're essentially saying, your withdrawal dictates my behavior. Your silence controls me. And that's exactly what gives the silent treatment its sting. It's not just about someone refusing to speak. It's about how you react to it. The chase fuels the game. I know how tempting it is to beg for clarity. You just want closure, or at least acknowledgement. You want the tension to break. But if you've ever noticed, chasing almost never works. It doesn't thaw the ice, it makes it colder. It doesn't draw them out, it pushes them deeper into the silence. Because now their withdrawal is working. Now they see that by doing nothing, they can make you do everything. And that's why staying calm becomes so crucial. When you choose not to chase, when you choose to hold steady, you take the fuel out of the fire. Silence loses its edge when it doesn't get the reaction it was designed to provoke. Now, staying calm doesn't mean you don't care. It doesn't mean you're detached or indifferent. It means you value yourself, respect enough not to abandon it for someone else's refusal to engage. It means you know that communication can only work if both people participate, and you're not going to sacrifice your peace of mind begging for what should be freely given words, presence, honesty. And here's what calm really does for you. It gives you clarity, because in the heat of the chase, your emotions run wild. You can't think straight when you're desperate for a response. But in calm, you get perspective. You're able to step back and see the bigger picture. You can ask yourself, is this silence about needing space, or is it about control? Am I dealing with someone who needs time to cool off, or someone who's using withdrawal as a weapon? That kind of clarity only comes when you resist the urge to react. So instead of chasing, try this: acknowledge the silence, but don't crumble under it. You can calmly let them know you're available to talk when they're ready. That's it. No begging. No endless knocking on a door that's already closed. Just a clear signal that you're open to communication, and then you let go. I know, letting go feels uncomfortable. It feels risky. It feels like, what if they never come back? What if the relationship breaks because I didn't fight hard enough? But here's the truth. If the only way to hold on to someone is by chasing them while they run away, then you're not holding on to a relationship, you're holding on to a performance. And that's not love. That's exhaustion. Your calm response isn't just about them. It's about you teaching yourself that your peace is not negotiable, that you will not lose yourself in someone else's silence, that you're not going to let your emotions be controlled by someone else's refusal to show up. And here's the paradox. You'd be surprised how often calm works better than chasing, because when you stop scrambling for their attention, they start realizing the silence isn't as powerful as they thought. They start noticing that you're not panicked, you're not begging, you're not running in circles, you're steady. And steady is intimidating to someone who thought they could control you with absence. So the next time you face the silent treatment, remind yourself you don't have to chase what should come willingly. You don't have to run after words that are being withheld. Calm is not weakness. Calm is not surrender. Calm is strength. Calm is dignity. And sometimes the most powerful answer to silence is to let it echo and stand firm in who you are, untouched by the noise of what's missing. When you're dealing with the silent treatment, one of the most important skills you can bring to the table is setting boundaries. And I don't mean setting them in a way that feels like slamming a door or throwing an ultimatum across the room. I mean boundaries that are clear, calm, and rooted in self-respect. Because boundaries are not about controlling someone else, they're about defining what you will and will not accept in your life. Think about it this way: if someone refuses to talk to you and you allow that behavior to go unchecked, you're essentially saying, "This is okay with me." You can continue to ignore me, and I'll keep waiting in the dark. But when you set a boundary, you shift the balance. You're saying, I want connection, but I will not participate in a dynamic that strips me of my dignity. The tricky part is, most of us were never taught how to set boundaries without anger. We confuse boundaries with ultimatums. We think it has to sound harsh. If you don't talk to me, I'm leaving. If you don't stop ignoring me, I'll ignore you back. But ultimatums are just another form of control, and they keep the cycle alive. A real boundary doesn't come from a place of control, it comes from clarity. For example, instead of saying, you'd better stop giving me this silent treatment, a boundary sounds like, I want to talk when you're ready, but I won't sit here being ignored. If you're not ready to communicate, I'll step away until you are. Do you see the difference? One is a threat. The other is a declaration of self-respect. You're not forcing them to speak, but you're also not allowing yourself to be trapped in their silence. Boundaries are about you. They're about how you choose to respond, not how you force someone else to behave. And the beauty of that is, boundaries put the focus back where your power is, on your own choices. Because here's the hard truth. You can't make someone communicate. You can't make someone open up if they're determined to shut down. What you can do is draw the line where their behavior starts crossing into disrespect. And here's something people often overlook. When you set a boundary calmly, you actually create an opportunity for the relationship to get healthier, because you're modeling what healthy communication looks like. You're saying, I'm willing to engage, but not under these terms. I respect you enough to wait until you're ready, but I respect myself enough not to sit in silence indefinitely. That's a powerful message. It shifts the energy from confrontation to accountability. Now, I'm not saying this is easy. The first time you set a boundary like this, your heart will probably be racing. You'll wonder if you're being too cold, too distant, too harsh. But remember, boundaries are not about punishment. They're not about pushing someone away. They're about protecting the space where love and respect can exist. Without boundaries, resentment grows. With boundaries, there's at least a chance for healing. And you know what else happens when you set a boundary? You remind yourself of your own worth. You stop sitting in someone else's silence questioning your value. You stop waiting for their approval to feel grounded. A boundary is like drawing a circle around your peace and saying, this space is mine to protect. And the moment you draw that circle, you stop being a passive player in the game. You start leading from strength, not fear. The truth is, people who rely on the silent treatment often count on the fact that you won't set boundaries. They count on your discomfort. They count on your fear of rocking the boat. But when you calmly, respectfully put your boundary in place, you disrupt that pattern. You show them that silence won't work the way they thought it would. And even if they don't change immediately, even if they keep trying the same tactic, you'll notice a shift inside yourself. You'll feel lighter, stronger, more in control of your own reactions, because you're no longer stuck waiting for them to choose you. You've already chosen yourself. So when you face the silent treatment, remember, it's not about fighting fire with fire. It's not about yelling into the void, demanding words that aren't ready to come. It's about drawing your line with grace and conviction. And when you do that, you're not just protecting yourself. You're setting the standard for how love, respect, and communication will exist in your life. And the moment you set that standard, you stop being at the mercy of silence and start living from the strength of your voice. When you're stuck in the middle of the silent treatment, it's easy to get tunnel vision. All you see is the quiet, the walls, the absence of words. You start obsessing about how to get them to break the silence, how to hear something, anything, that gives you a sense of where you stand. But if you only focus on the silence itself, you'll miss the bigger truth. Because the silence is just the symptom. The real story lies underneath it. Most of the time, the silent treatment isn't about silence at all. It's about what that silence is trying to cover. Maybe it's anger that someone doesn't know how to express without blowing up. Maybe it's shame because they feel exposed or guilty. Maybe it's fear of conflict, fear of vulnerability, fear of saying something they can't take back. The silence is like a mask, but if you only fight the mask, you'll never touch what's underneath. That's why it's so important to take a step back and ask yourself, what's really going on here? Not in a way that excuses the behavior, because let's be clear, the silent treatment is not healthy, but in a way that helps you see the full picture. Because if you treat silence as the problem, all you'll do is push for noise. And noise isn't the same thing as resolution. What you really want is honesty. And honesty can only happen when you dig past the surface. Let me give you an example. Imagine you're dealing with someone who goes silent every time you bring up money or responsibility or a mistake they made. On the outside, it looks like they're just ignoring you. But underneath, maybe they're carrying shame they don't want to admit. Maybe they don't have the tools to sit in that discomfort, so silence feels safer than confessing what they feel. Now, does that make the silent treatment acceptable? No, but it explains why the silence shows up. And once you understand that, you can approach the situation with a little more wisdom, a little more strategy. Instead of saying, "You never talk to me," you always shut down, you might shift it to, "I feel like when this subject comes up, it's hard for us to stay connected. I want to understand what's underneath that." That's not you excusing their behavior. It's you addressing the root instead of the symptom. And that's how real conversations start. Here's the thing, people who rely on silence usually don't know another way to handle conflict. It's their shield. It's their escape. And if you just keep pounding on the shield, they'll only hold it tighter. But when you step back and look at the emotions behind it, you might be able to open a door that words alone can't. Now, let's be honest, not every silence has a noble reason behind it. Sometimes it's not shame or fear. Sometimes it's control. Sometimes it's manipulation. And in those cases, looking for a root helps you realize that the root is unhealthy. It tells you this isn't about a misunderstanding. This is about a pattern. And knowing that truth helps you make better decisions about how much of yourself you want to invest in someone who uses silence as a weapon. But here's the key, whether the silence comes from fear, shame, or control, you're no longer stuck fighting the wrong battle. You're not just reacting to the quiet. You're asking, what does this quiet mean? What's fueling it? That shift in perspective is what keeps you from wasting your energy on surface-level fights. It allows you to respond with clarity instead of panic. Because let's be real, silence can feel like rejection. It can feel like abandonment. And when you're hurt, you want to push back, demand attention, demand words. But if you only fight to break the silence, you'll never heal the wound that caused it. And healing, that's what creates growth. That's what builds relationships worth keeping. So when you're faced with the silent treatment, don't just ask, why won't they talk? Ask, what are they afraid of saying? What are they trying to avoid? What are they hiding behind this silence? Sometimes the answer will be something you can work through together. Other times the answer will tell you it's time to step away. But either way, you'll be dealing with the reality, not the shadow it casts. Because in the end, silence is only the surface. The real power lies in uncovering what's beneath it. And when you choose to focus on the root, instead of just the symptom, you stop spinning your wheels in the noise of nothing and start creating space for real truth to be spoken. One of the hardest parts about dealing with the silent treatment is how much it drains you. It's not just about the silence in the room. It's about the noise it creates in your own head. You start replaying every word you said, every moment that might have triggered it, every possibility of what they might be thinking but refusing to say. And before you know it, their silence has taken over your entire mental space. It follows you to work, it distracts you when you're with friends, it keeps you up at night. That's the power of the silent treatment. It doesn't just mute their voice, it starts muting yours. But here's the truth. You don't have to hand over that much power. You don't have to let their withdrawal drain your energy or hijack your peace of mind. Protecting your emotional energy isn't selfish, it's survival. Because the longer you allow yourself to obsess over someone else's silence, the less room you leave for your own growth, your own joy, your own clarity. And let's be real, it's tempting to obsess. We think if we just figure it out, if we replay the situation enough times, we'll crack the code and finally get them to speak. But silence isn't a puzzle you're meant to solve. Silence is a choice they're making. And if you keep pouring your energy into solving their choice, you'll empty yourself in the process. So what do you do instead? You redirect. You take the energy that wants to spiral into worry, and you pour it into something that feeds you. You focus on your work, your health, your friendships, your purpose. You remind yourself that your life is bigger than this moment of rejection. Because the truth is, the silent treatment only feels powerful when it becomes the center of your world. When you widen your focus, when you put your attention back on what you can control, the silence shrinks. And I know some of you might be thinking, but if I don't keep trying, won't they think I don't care? Won't they think I've given up? No. Protecting your energy isn't giving up. It's refusing to be consumed. It's saying I still care, but I care about myself too. That balance is what keeps you strong. Here's something powerful to remember: your attention is currency. Where you spend it determines what grows in your life. If you keep spending it on someone's silence, all you'll grow is anxiety. But if you spend it on your goals, your passions, your well-being, you grow confidence. And confidence has a way of speaking louder than words ever could. The silent treatment thrives on pulling you into a place of doubt. It wants you unsettled, second-guessing, chasing. But when you protect your emotional energy, when you keep living fully in spite of it, you send a message without ever raising your voice: your silence doesn't own me. Your withdrawal doesn't define me. I refuse to lose myself while waiting for you to find your words. And that shift doesn't just protect you, it changes the whole dynamic. Because the more you show up for your own life, the less the silent treatment works. Instead of looking desperate for scraps of attention, you stand grounded in your own worth. And that's powerful. That's what breaks the cycle. Now, let's be honest, it's not easy. It takes practice to pull your mind back when it keeps wandering to their silence. It takes discipline to choose your peace over your need for answers. But every time you do, you're strengthening yourself. You're training your heart to stay steady even when someone else refuses to meet you halfway. And maybe, just maybe, when they realize their silence no longer drains you, they'll start to see that communication is the only real way forward. But whether they do or not, that's not where your freedom lies. Your freedom lies in knowing that your energy, your joy, and your life are too valuable to waste on someone else's refusal to speak. So protect your peace like it's the most important thing you own, because it is. And remember, no one's silence has the power to silence you unless you hand them that power. There comes a point where you have to be honest with yourself. You can try to recognize the silence for what it is. You can stay calm instead of chasing. You can set boundaries with respect. You can even dig deeper to understand the root, and you can protect your own energy. But if the silent treatment becomes a repeated pattern, if it turns into the language someone chooses every single time there's conflict, then you have to face a tough reality. Not every silence is worth waiting through. Not every relationship is worth saving. That's the part no one likes to talk about, because it's easier to believe that if we just hold on long enough, things will change. It's easier to tell ourselves that one day the silence will break and the words we've been desperate for will finally come. And sometimes that's true. Sometimes, with the right tools and the right willingness on both sides, relationships can heal. But other times silence isn't a pause, it's a pattern. And when silence becomes a weapon, when it's used over and over again to punish, control, or manipulate, you have to ask yourself, is this really love or is this emotional abuse? Walking away doesn't mean you're weak. Walking away doesn't mean you didn't care. Walking away means you finally decided to care about yourself enough not to live in a cycle that keeps breaking you down. Because if someone repeatedly chooses silence over dialogue, withdrawal over honesty, control over connection, then what they're really saying is, I'd rather keep you guessing than keep you close. And you deserve better than that. Now, I know leaving, or even just pulling back, feels terrifying. You start thinking, what if I'm making a mistake? What if they finally change right after I go? What if no one else ever loves me this much again? But here's the truth: love without respect isn't love. Connection without communication isn't connection. You're not losing something real by walking away from a cycle of silence. You're making room for something real to find you. And walking away doesn't always mean the end of the relationship. Sometimes it just means you're no longer available to play the game. It means you stop rewarding silence with pursuit. It means you stop handing over your peace every time someone refuses to speak. It means you put the responsibility back where it belongs, on them. And in that space, they may finally realize silence isn't working anymore. They may finally step up and communicate, or they may not. But either way, you've stopped sacrificing yourself just to keep the connection alive. That's the real power in knowing when to walk away. It's not about bitterness. It's not about revenge. It's not about proving a point. It's about dignity. It's about standing in the truth that your voice, your peace, and your well-being matter too much to keep being silenced. And once you internalize that, silence no longer feels like a prison. It feels like a mirror. It shows you who someone really is, and it shows you who you're becoming in the process. And if you look in that mirror and realize you're shrinking, you're dimming your own light, you're losing your sense of self just to hold on to someone who refuses to meet you halfway, then it's time. Time to step back. Time to step out. Time to reclaim the space in your life that silence has been stealing. Because here's the thing, sometimes strength is found in staying, in working it out, in pushing through the hard moments. But other times, strength is found in letting go, in deciding that you will no longer participate in a cycle that keeps you small. And only you can know which moment you're in. Only you can decide whether this silence is a temporary pause that leads to growth or a permanent strategy that will only lead to more pain. But when you see it clearly, when you know in your gut that the silence is no longer a season but a sentence, then walking away isn't just an option. It's the only way to protect your soul. And that's not weakness. That's wisdom. That's strength. That's freedom. So don't be afraid to choose peace over punishment. Don't be afraid to walk away from silence that only seeks to control you. Because the day you do, you'll realize something powerful. The loudest voice you'll ever hear is the one inside you that finally says, enough.